for the last 9 years, the single largest point source of greenhouse gases in the country has been a coal-fired power plant right outside of Birmingham. 9 years running, that's been the largest single emitter of greenhouse gases in the country, and there's no evidence or indication that that will be changing anytime soon.
Hey there, I'm Jesse Fox Mayshark, and this is Headlights, Voices from the Progressive South. Headlights is a production of the Progressive South, a nonprofit media platform dedicated to amplifying progressive voices and values across the southern United States. Voices like Dennis Pillion, a reporter for Inside Climate News, who we heard up top. He's been reporting a fascinating series of articles on Alabama Power, the largest power company in the state, and the reason that Alabamians pay the highest electric bills in the country. He'll guide us through the tangled history and shameless self-dealing behind that behemoth. Later, in our Arts and Culture segment, we'll take a look at a new play in Miami about a pivotal political fight in the city's past, which resonates strongly with its present. First, the news roundup. This week, we'll take a look at steps toward new gun regulations in Virginia, and yet another interesting Democratic primary race, this one in North Carolina. But the big news out of the South last week was another special election, this time in Texas. You'll recall that in December, a special election for a congressional seat in Tennessee sparked national interest when Democratic candidate Afton Bain came within 9 points of winning a district that Donald Trump had carried by 22 points just a year earlier. If that incursion into a safe GOP margin was a warning bell for Republicans in 2026, the result in Texas State Senate District 9 last week was more like an air raid siren. The seat in the district just west of Dallas, which includes part of Fort Worth, had been held by Republicans for decades. In 2024, Trump won the district by a 17-point margin. But on January 31st, in a special election to complete the last 11 months of a term, Democratic candidate Taylor Rehmet defeated Trump-endorsed and heavily funded Republican candidate Lee Wamsgans by a 14-point margin. That represents a 31-point swing in Republican support from Trump's 2024 vote. As every pundit on the planet rushed to say afterward, it's hard to extrapolate too much from special elections. They tend to draw only the most committed voters, for one thing, and they can be affected by local variables, including the quality of the candidates themselves. Rehmet was a first-time candidate, and he has the kind of resume that can resonate across a range of voters. He's an aircraft mechanic and local union president who grew up in a working-class family and joined the U.S. Air Force out of high school. He ran a campaign focused on good-paying jobs, workers' rights, affordable housing, public education, and protection of democracy and voters' rights. He promised to keep culture wars out of public schools, saying on his website that he would, quote, protect public education from privatization and keep extremist politics and religious ideology out of the classroom, unquote. That was quite a contrast to Wamsgans, a well-known conservative political operator in the district who had never run for office before. She's the chief communications officer of a right-wing cell phone company called Patriot Mobile and has been director of its very active political action committee. She's recruited and supported far-right candidates for local school board seats, engineering culturally conservative takeovers of multiple school boards and fighting against discussion of race, sex, and gender issues in the classroom. She's been acclaimed by national conservative groups and was endorsed by Trump as well as by Texas's powerful Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick. But she's also been a divisive figure in the local Republican Party. In November's open primary, she took 36% of the total vote, while another more moderate Republican, John Huffman, took 16%. Both were well behind Kemet, who nearly won the race outright with just under 48% of the vote. In the January 31st runoff, Wamsgans added only 7 points to her total, finishing with 43% to Rehmet's 57%. The victory could be short-lived. Rehmet will hold the office only through the end of the year and will have to run for re-election in November. Wamsgans is running again and pledging to beat him this time. Texas Democrats are cautioning against over-interpreting the win. But former Congressman and U.S. Senate candidate Beto O'Rourke, whose political action group helped support Rehmet's run, told the Texas Tribune that the message of the election was clear. He said, quote, "I don't think any Republican is safe right now. I think the people of Texas have absolutely had it and are looking for change." Another race to watch this year is in North Carolina. There was a fascinating story co-published last week by The Assembly, which is a great independent source for North Carolina news, and the national political website Notice. It highlighted the Democratic primary in the state's 4th congressional district. It includes Durham and Chapel Hill, home to the University of North Carolina, and is rated as the safest Democratic congressional seat in the state. That means the Democratic primary is where the local congressional race is generally settled. And this year's looks to be another referendum on the direction of the party. We talked last month about another competitive Democratic primary in Memphis, Tennessee, pitting incumbent septuagenarian Congressman Steve Cohen against younger, more populist challenger Justin Pearson. North Carolina's 4th district is currently represented by Congresswoman Valerie Foushee. She's only held the seat for 4 years, but she's a veteran of local politics. She's been chair of the Chapel Hill School Board, an Orange County commissioner, a state representative, and a state senator, and was the first black woman to serve in all of those positions. Now 69, Foushee is seeking a 3rd congressional term. She's generally progressive, ranked by UCLA as more liberal than 84% of her House Democratic colleagues. But she's facing a strong primary challenge from a younger candidate, Nida Alam, who is running to her left, in particular on the issue of Israel and its war and destruction in Gaza. Alam, who's 32, worked on Bernie Sanders' 2016 campaign and then served on the state Democratic Committee's executive board. She became the first Muslim woman elected to office in North Carolina in 2020 when she won a seat on the Durham County Commission. She went on to be elected chair of the commission in 2023. Alam has been endorsed by progressive groups including Justice Democrats, which is also backing Justin Pearson in Memphis, and College Democrats of America, along with the young Democratic activist David Hogg. Foushee has support from traditional Democratic backers, including Emily's List and the North Carolina State AFL-CIO. Alam ran for the seat before in 2022, the year Foushee was first elected to Congress. Foushee won 46% of the vote in a crowded primary field that year. Alam finished second with 37%. As the article in the Assembly makes clear, there are not vast policy differences between the two, who are both on the left flank of the Democratic Party. The biggest difference was in their response to Israel's invasion of Gaza after October 7, 2023, and the devastation that has followed. Foushee, who in the past has received money from the pro-Israel lobbying group AIPAC, initially supported Israel's response, before eventually backing away as protests over the war grew. Alam is a staunch supporter of Palestinian rights and calls Israel's actions a genocide. There are complex layers to the race, both generational and racial. Foushee grew up in the midst of the civil rights movement and is part of a lineage of black political aspiration and representation in North Carolina. Alam represents newer, younger voices in the state, including immigrants. She herself was born in Canada and moved to the U.S. as a young child. Maybe the most telling quote in the article comes from Wesley Knott, the 29-year-old chair of the Wake County Democratic Party. The party doesn't make primary endorsements, but Knott has personally endorsed Alam. He told the Assembly, quote, "For me, this is fundamentally not about Valerie Foushee. I think she's served honorably and with integrity. And if you think that the Democratic Party is on the right track, then I think she's a perfectly acceptable option in the primary." The whole article is very much worth reading, and the race will be fascinating to watch. The primary election is on March 3rd, less than a month away. Virginia, the South's bluest state, is now about a month into both its legislative session and the tenure of new Democratic Governor Abigail Spanberger. Among the bills moving through the General Assembly is a gun safety measure that would build on existing regulations that are already relatively strict, at least by Southern standards. The advocacy group Everytown for Gun Safety already ranks Virginia as having the 15th strongest gun regulations in the country. It's the only Southern state in the top 20. Those rules would get even tighter with House Bill 217, which would ban the manufacture, sale, import, purchase, and transfer of many semi-automatic rifles, pistols, and shotguns under an expanded definition of assault firearms. The bill is sponsored by Democratic delegate Dan Helmer of Fairfax, an Iraq War veteran. He told Virginia's Capital News Service, quote, "Our schools and our communities shouldn't be war zones. Weapons similar to those I carried in Iraq and Afghanistan have no place in our streets, and this bill seeks to address that." Similar bills passed the Democratic-controlled General Assembly the last 2 years, but they were vetoed by Republican Governor Glenn Youngkin. Assuming the bill passes again this year, its odds of becoming law appear greatly increased. Of course, the odds of such legislation passing in most of the rest of our southern states are very long indeed. Okay, now we're to my conversation with Dennis Pillion. He's an Alabama-based reporter for Inside Climate News, a nonprofit, Pulitzer Prize-winning digital news outlet focused on climate and environmental issues. Pillion was born and lives in Birmingham, Alabama. Before joining ICN, he was a reporter for 17 years for Alabama Media Group, which owns the Birmingham News and other outlets across the state. That included 9 years as the statewide natural resources reporter, work that obviously gave him a good grounding for his ICN reporting. He's won numerous Green Eyeshade and Alabama Press Association awards for his coverage of environmental issues in the state. Over the past few months, he and his colleague Lee Hedgepeth at ICN have been publishing a fascinating series of articles called Wired for Profit about Alabama Power, the state's largest electric utility. You can find the link in the show notes. Their stories have dug into the history of the company and looked at why Alabama has the highest residential electricity rates in the country, while Alabama Power consistently produces some of the utility industry's highest profits. It's also an especially dirty power company in terms of its reliance on fossil fuels and disinterest in renewable energy. I wanted to talk to Pillion about that and more, including the role played in all of this by the state's notorious segregationist governor and four-time presidential candidate George Wallace. It's all quite a story of literal backroom deals and the tolls they take on the state. So Seth, let's go to the tape. All right, Dennis Pillion, thanks for joining me.
Thank you. Great to be here.
So I was wondering if you could just start out by telling me a little bit about Inside Climate News. I know it's been around for a good long time now, and it won a Pulitzer Prize even. What is it? What do you all do?
Yeah, the Pulitzer Prize was before I got here. But so Inside Climate News was founded in 2007. And basically, we are a completely donor-funded nonprofit newsroom. We take contributions, and we like to kind of produce the kind of in-depth, long-form journalism that's really challenging for local newsrooms to produce in this day and age. I'm part of the local reporting network. We have almost 30 reporters now in total, including some college fellows. So we're a growing newsroom, and I think this model of us, being donor funded and not having to worry about all of the problems that a lot of local newsrooms go through. Our content is it's available for any kind of local news outlets that want to run it. So we take the model of we produce the content for them, and hopefully it gets distributed through the wider channels to the wider audiences out there.
And your area of coverage, obviously a lot of focus on climate issues and climate change and sort of environmental impacts overall, right?
Yeah, for sure. We started very climate focused. We're kind of broadening out a little bit to more just kind of general environmental coverage with the idea that, it's all linked. Climate change and biodiversity and environmental justice, all these things are really kind of inextricably linked. So we're happy to cover all those kinds of issues. I am the Alabama reporter. There's actually two of us in Alabama now, focusing just on environmental issues in the state of Alabama.
Right. So, and you and your colleague there, I guess Lee Hedgepeth is the other Alabama reporter, right? You guys have been doing this series on Alabama Power called Wired for Profit, which not living in Alabama, I was not very familiar with Alabama Power, and so it's been really interesting to read. Can you start out for those of us who don't live in Alabama? I'm sure people in Alabama are very familiar with Alabama Power, but tell me about it. Obviously, it's the major power company in Alabama, and I guess it's part of the broader Southern Company, right?
Right. It is the largest power provider in Alabama. It covers roughly 2/3 of the state, if you want to look at it that way. It's an investor-owned utility. Like you said, it's owned by Southern Company, which also owns Georgia Power and Mississippi Power. They're headquartered in Atlanta. But yeah, it is the largest provider in the state. The TVA provides power to a lot of kind of local distribution companies up in North Alabama. But for, kind of the central and southern part of the state, just about everybody is on the Alabama Power system.
And Alabama Power has very high, especially residential electric rates, right? Where does it, can you talk a little bit about just kind of where its rates rank and then also where its profits rank relative to other major utilities? Because both of those seem pretty high.
They do seem pretty high, don't they? So I've been, an environmental reporter in Alabama for 10 years now. And you keep kind of noticing that, wow, these rates really do look higher than a lot of other places you try to compare it to. And utility comparisons are messy and hard to do. There's a lot of different factors that go into it. But for this project, Lee Hedgepeth and I, we really tried to dive down and compare utility to utility. And basically what we found is that Alabama Power's residential electric, the total bills, so we're looking, just the amount that people pay on their bills that goes to the utility. That is higher for Alabama Power customers than any other utility that we could find in the country. And to get to that, we looked at the FERC Form 1 filings for right at 100 of the largest utilities that we could find in the country. And none of them had, in 2024, higher total bills for their residential electric customers than Alabama Power. And obviously, not the only part of that, but a big part of that is the utility's profit itself. And in the second part of our series, we really we kind of tried to dug down and find out. Alabama Power's what they call the rate of return, their return on equity, has been it's dropped a little bit actually in recent years, but they've been making basically 13 to 14.5% profit on everything they do since 1982. Mm-hmm. And that's much higher than your average. The average rate case that was approved in 2024 was, I think, 9.5%.
And at the kind of scale they're operating at, obviously the difference between 9.5% and 13% is many millions of dollars, I imagine.
Sure. When your equity is in the billions, then 4% of billions adds up to be a lot.
So as you were digging into this, I guess, before you started this series, I mean, as you say, you've been covering these issues in Alabama for a while, so you maybe already had some grounding in the background of it. But I guess what did you uncover as I assume this is something that people in Alabama have been aware of for a long time, that their electric bills are high, right?
I think they've been aware of it. I think because of the way... So Alabama Power's rates are set by the state's Public Service Commission, it's elected officials. There's 3 of them in statewide elections. So those are the people who actually set the rates and set the allowed rate of profit that is so high. So the electric rates are set by the Public Service Commission, but one of the criticisms of that commission that you see a lot is they're very opaque. It's very hard for the average person to actually see what is going on inside the commission. Most states, almost all states, when the utility wants to raise rates, they have formal hearings. They're called rate cases. And, they would go before the Public Service Commission in these kind of courtroom-style hearings, and they would try to make their argument for why they need a rate increase, and these kinds of things, they tend to get long. I know they are tedious for a lot of people. There's a lot of work that goes into them, and some expenses, certainly, for hiring lawyers and hiring people to make that information public. But those are the best way that the public has to get information about what the utility is doing and how it's regulated.
Right, and in most states, people can hear that discussion, right? Like those meetings are held in public.
Absolutely. The meetings are held in public. The video archives are often put online. There are transcripts. And in addition, outside groups are allowed to kind of be interveners and to challenge the utility and say, we don't think that they need all this infrastructure. We don't think that they should earn this high a rate of return. In Alabama, we don't have that. In Alabama, all of that is kind of negotiated behind closed doors between the utility and the Public Service Commission. And as a result of that, we have one of the least transparent processes in the country. I will say the least transparent process. I have not found, to my knowledge, another Public Service Commission that operates in this way, that operates where it's so hard for the public to see what's going on. And as a result, we have some of the highest utility profit margins in the country. And it's hard to see those two things and not think they're directly connected.
And one of the interesting things that your reporting gets into is how Alabama got into that position. And it seems like it was a reaction to prior kind of pitched political battles, very much involving former Governor George Wallace, right? So what role does George Wallace play in all this?
Absolutely, which is kind of, shocking and weird just to think about. But, George Wallace, who's the famous governor of the stand in the schoolhouse door, who, when he was first governor in the 1960s, would argue for segregation forever. That was his platform. But, he was governor for, I believe, 6 terms. So he was governor on into the 1980s, and after his segregation battle was lost, he kind of needed a new issue, and he chose the power company. He chose the power rates are too high. And essentially, through the political process, the story is going to be a lot more detailed on this than I am, so you can go read the story if this is interesting. But really, Wallace and his people were able to just entangle Alabama Power in the regulatory process. They were able to challenge in court and to hold up every time the company wanted to increase rates, which, sometimes those were for valid reasons. If the situations changed due to inflation or whatever else was going on in the 1970s, especially, Alabama was growing as a state then. They needed more power. But Wallace was able to really kind of thwart the utility's efforts to grow and to maintain the profit level at a level that would sustain them. So, the old legends at the company go is that they were close to bankruptcy, actually, that they had millions upon millions in debts that they couldn't pay because of all these kind of George Wallace shenanigans that were happening inside the state government. And eventually that kind of reached a level where even the Wallace people in the early 1980s said, okay, this is not sustainable. We can't continue to have, the state's electric provider for all of the houses and businesses and industry in the state. We can't have them teetering on the verge of bankruptcy. That's not good for the state. That's not good for anybody. But what they appear to have done then is they swung 180 degrees the other direction. They tried to create a system that was totally immune to kind of public wrangling or interference from the state government. But as a result of that, you get a system where there's almost no guardrails.
So basically, by trying to protect the company from these political shenanigans, they also ended up essentially shielding it from real meaningful public input and accountability, right?
They might have done too good a job in shielding it. And part of the issue is when they implemented this system in 1982, conditions were a lot different than they are right now. Interest rates were really high in 82, some of the highest, that we've ever had. And for the utility system to work, the investor-owned utility system, these utilities, they depend on investment, from outside sources to build their power plants, to operate, basically. And, to get those investors to buy bonds, you have to offer better returns than the interest rates at the time. So maybe this 14.5 rate of return was appropriate in 1982, but they've had it for, 44 years and counting. And that's, part of the thing in other states when they have rate cases, they'll last for a year or 3 years, or there's kind of a regular cycle so that we can kind of evaluate it based on the current conditions. And this one that they've had has just been locked in place for almost as long as I've been alive, and I'm not that young.
So what impact does this have? I mean, you talk about in the series that this is these are the highest residential rates in the country in a state that is still one of the poorer states in the country, right? So, I mean, I imagine that means that Alabamians are, in a lot of cases, paying a higher percentage of their income every year than people in a lot of other states for their power.
Absolutely. It creates a huge energy burden. There's kind of different ways you can look at that, but we have one of the highest energy burdens in the country as well. And the fact is, throughout the Southeast, cost of living is generally pretty low. And you look at some of these neighboring utilities, even other utilities in Alabama, Alabama power rates are much higher and the total bills are much higher. So when you have, populations that are already struggling financially, that are trying to make ends meet, it just gets that much harder. The second largest provider in Alabama is Huntsville Utilities. And I hope I'm getting the exact numbers right, but in 2024, Alabama power residential rates were 46% higher than Huntsville Utilities. And so, it's obviously it's going to be tough for people to make ends meet. And it's been that way for a long time. And I think for a long time, it kind of flew under the radar. Like, people thought, hey, my power bills are pretty high, but it wasn't that easy to compare them to other utilities, and it kind of just was allowed to kind of function as the status quo for a long time. I think now, for a long time, Alabama wasn't really growing as a state. Our electricity demand wasn't really growing. But now with all these data center projects popping up, all of a sudden it looks like now we are going to need more electricity, and we are going to need, maybe new power plants or new facilities or upgrades to old facilities. And that's going to be really expensive. And when power bills are already so high, when things are already stressed and so many people are already struggling just to make ends meet, what happens when all of a sudden you need a new power plant? It just pushes it that much higher, and you're going to push a lot of people past a breaking point.
And in addition to the cost of this, especially as they look to add more power, Alabama Power is also a pretty dirty power company in terms of its fuel mix, right? I mean, this is mostly fossil fuels that we're talking about there.
Yeah, Alabama Power has a very heavy, for decades, has had a very heavy coal component in their fuel mix. For the last 9 years, the single largest point source of greenhouse gases in the country has been a coal-fired power plant right outside of Birmingham. 9 years running, that's been the largest single emitter of greenhouse gases in the country, and there's no evidence or indication that will be changing anytime soon. In addition to that, we have a lot of coal ash in the state. Where other utilities around the southeast, some of them are choosing to actually dig out those dirty coal ash ponds and move the ash to a lined landfill. Alabama Power is not doing that. They are kind of marching ahead with these cover-in-place plans. And the idea there is that rather than moving the coal ash to a lined landfill, so when you cover coal ash in place, that coal ash in many cases, in all cases in Alabama, is still in contact with the groundwater. So that coal ash material, which includes things like mercury, arsenic, things you don't want in your water, are in constant contact with the groundwater. They're constantly leaching toxins into the outside environment. And then it also kind of, it leaves the possibility of, well, what if there is some kind of catastrophic breach, which we've seen before, which we saw in Kingston, Tennessee at the TVA plant.
Just down the road from me, a good friend of mine was the lead reporter on that, and that was quite a disaster.
Yeah, and one of Alabama Power's largest coal ash ponds is down in South Alabama, kind of right at the headwaters of the Mobile-Tensaw Delta, which is one of the most biodiverse places in the country. E.O. Wilson, our famous naturalist from Alabama, he and others, kind of started calling it North America's Amazon, because it's so rich, the biodiversity there. And, if something were to happen, of course, Alabama Power says that, the chances of that kind of a breach or an accident are they like to say it's none, but of course they would. If something were to happen there and you would have millions of tons of this ash slurry flooding into this delta, this kind of swampy wetland backwater area that, honestly, it is incredibly rich and biodiverse, in part because it's hard to get to. It would not have been an easy place to develop and build shopping malls and things. But you have just all these thousands of acres of pristine wilderness that, if that pond were to breach, that would be catastrophic.
And is there any move at Alabama Power toward renewables, toward more wind and solar and those things? I looked them up, and it looks like they have sort of a smattering of that, maybe just enough to have a brochure about, but doesn't seem like it's been a major focus.
They do. So Alabama Power's, I think their biggest argument has been that renewables are not cost-effective for them. So what we have are a handful of projects, some of them large, that were kind of initiated by outside parties. So you have Walmart that built a very large solar field in South Alabama. You have Meta that's developing some solar fields. The U.S. Army installations under the Obama administration, when that was a priority for the Department of Defense, we developed a couple of large solar projects at military bases. But all of those were kind of situations where the outside entity came to Alabama Power and wanted to develop that project. Alabama Power has not really taken any initiative on their own to build these kind of projects. And in fact, Alabama Power, looking at the small scale side, distributed solar, they impose a fee of, I believe it's $5.41 per kilowatt per month. If I wanted to put solar panels on my house right now, if I wanted to put, say a 5 kilowatt array on my roof, I would have to pay them more than $25 a month just because I have it.
Just to use the power that you're generating yourself.
Right. And so, what that's done is it just basically takes the financial incentive away for someone to install their own solar panels and basically ensures that they are totally just dependent on Alabama Power.
Right. They're basically treating it as a competitor, like you're competing with them by putting in.
Yeah, basically. And it's kind of like going to the grocery store and they try to charge you for growing your own lettuce.
Right.
I'm not quite sure how they can justify that, but they did. The Public Service Commission approved it. They approved it without really any public discussion or input allowed. It's been challenged a couple times over the years, but so far the company and the Public Service Commission are standing behind it, and they've even increased the fee over the years.
So I guess that gets us back to a good place to wrap up, which is talking about the structural challenges, obviously, of this system for anybody who's looking to change it. Is there? I mean, we have seen in some other states utility rates become a major political issue again in elections last year in New Jersey and in Georgia. That was a big issue that people talked about. Is there any movement in Alabama toward reconsidering that structure that they've set up there? Is there any political will or appetite for that?
So I think that remains to be seen. Alabama, we got a new Public Service Commission president last year. The previous president left to take a job with the Trump administration. So the governor appointed, her name is Cynthia Lee Almond. She was a state legislator, Republican, but kind of largely seen as sort of middle-of-the-road Republican, whereas the previous PSC president, Twinkle Kavanaugh, was this kind of real firebrand conservative type who liked to bash the liberals and talk about how the only reason that people wanted more regulation of Alabama Power was for San Francisco-based environmental groups.
By the way, I think that Twinkle Kavanaugh is an amazing name. When I first came across that, I couldn't believe it was real.
It's real. There's a lot about the Alabama Public Service Commission that doesn't seem real, but it is. But anyway, so we have a new PSC president now, and she's largely taken the attitude that she's still learning, she's still fact-finding, so she has been really non-committal as to whether she would want to keep the old system as is or make some changes to it or anything of that nature. So, a lot of us, we're kind of waiting to see what she does. So far, there has been one major expansion vote since she took office. Alabama Power purchased a natural gas plant from another utility. And she voted in favor of that purchase with the power company and with the other two commissioners. So again, I think she says she's in discovery mode and learning mode, and I think we're in wait and see mode whether she might actually be willing or able to change things and shake up the system a little bit. I don't think there's a lot of concern that a Democrat would suddenly win a seat on the Alabama Public Service Commission. But I do think it's becoming less of a Democrat-Republican issue just because it's affecting everybody. You'll even see like Senator Katie Britt now talking about how Alabama Power's rates are the highest in the Southeast, which, not to completely toot our own horn, but those were some of the revelations that we had in our story that now she has picked up and is running with there. So I do think there is a growing concern across the political spectrum about this. I think, and maybe some more realizations that the system we have is really is not going to be tenable in the long term. I think there's just only so much blood you can squeeze out of a turnip, and I think maybe we're getting there.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, and obviously you can find all of that reporting and everything else that you all do at InsideClimateNews.org. Is this series, the Wired for Profit series, complete, or are there further installments to come?
There are further installments to come, so we'll stay tuned, as they say, and we'll have more coming out in the coming weeks.
Great. Well, thanks a lot for talking about it. Really interesting stuff.
Yeah, happy to.
In 1973, the Miami-Dade County Commission officially adopted Spanish as the county's second language, recognizing the growing number of Spanish speakers who had arrived from Cuba over the prior decade. County signage, meeting agendas, and communications were posted and published in both English and Spanish. Then in 1980, after a surge of new lower-income Cubans arrived during the Mariel boat lift, a spike in white ethnic resentment led the county to reverse course. The commission passed an ordinance designating Miami as English only and prohibited public funds from being spent on Spanish-language materials. That backlash is the subject of a new play called English Only, currently on stage at the Colony Theater in Miami Beach. Produced by the adventurous theater company Miami New Drama, English Only was written by journalist-turned-playwright Nicholas Griffin. He based it on research he did for a nonfiction book he wrote about Miami in 1980. Miami New Drama artistic director Michael Hausman told the Miami Herald that the play was already in development before Trump won a second term on a nativist anti-immigrant platform, but the resonances between then and now were already obvious. He said, quote, "We're really telling the story of 1980 with the mirror to 2026. It's impossible not to. Maybe had we done this play in 2015, it would have read completely different. Hopefully in 10 years, this is not an issue we have anymore, but it sure as hell is an issue we have right now." It's not an issue in Miami-Dade County, at least. In 1993, the county again reversed itself and repealed the English-only ordinance. Anyone who's spent time in Miami can attest that it's one of the most bilingual places in the country. But that doesn't hold true across the state. Just last Friday, February 6th, a new Florida law took effect requiring that all driver's license tests, both the written exam for a permit and the driving skills road test, be conducted and passed in English only. The play runs through February 22nd. You can find ticket information in the show notes. And that wraps us up for this week. Remember, The Progressive South is a nonprofit enterprise, and you can find information about supporting us on our website, theprogressivesouth.org. You can also reach out to me directly at jmayshark@theprogressivesouth.org. Thanks to our friends in Bark for our theme music, and to Lord Seth the Libertarian for his production work at Barbarian Productions. And thanks to you for listening. We'll talk to you soon.